I'm here today to do a top 10 Tuesday. Last week I did do a top 10 Tuesday, but I didn't do a top 5 Wednesday, so I'm back this week. Sorry, last week got a little bit hectic. But this week's theme is books that have surprised you in a good way or a bad way. And I had to really comb through my Goodreads for this answer, but I have come up with the good and the bad. So we're going to focus on the good because that's what I like to do. The first book is not going to be a shock to anyone if you guys have followed me this year because I adore this book. I talk about this book constantly, and that is Geekerella by Ashley Potter. The romance genre has not always been my favorite. Just because I need a little something else when I read romance. Either I need a mystery or I need a self-discovery. I just need something. But I picked this book up and I literally devoured it in 2 days. My friend Justin was like, you have to read this. I think you'd really like it. And I was like, I don't know. I had an arc from it that I got at a convention and I read it and I adored it. I love this book so much. I love Elia. I love Ella. I love Darian. I love the self-discovery. I love the fandom love. If you're a fandom nerd of anything, if you like Harry Potter, if you like anything, I think you'd like this book. But I love the self-discovery in these characters, and I loved how we really got to know both characters. I thought it was so well done, and she really hit my fandom heart, and I cried from happiness, I cried from sadness. I thought it was just so well crafted, and I really, really love this book. I adored it. Ashley Poston has become one of my favorite authors, and I really cannot wait to read Heart of Iron. But this book was definitely a book that surprised me in 2017, and it continues to surprise me in 2018. I'm going to chat about is the Pushing the Limit series by Katie McGarry. Book on Hypable.com. I was listening to a bunch of podcasts, and their book pockets, which is currently on hiatus but should be back soon. At least I hope they come back soon. They were talking about romance novels for people that don't like romance novels, and they mentioned this series. And when I read the summary of the first book, I was totally in. I bought it and I fell in love with these characters. This is definitely a grittier and more emotional romance, which I really tend to like. But the first book follows Echo and Noah, and Noah is a foster kid, and Echo has had a very, very traumatic past. But when their lives become unexpectedly connected, sparks fly. And I really love this book. It's dual perspective, so you get in both their heads, and I just devoured this book. I loved it so much. I loved the subsequent books in this book series even more. As much as I love Echo and Noah, I love Beth and Ryan. I love Isaiah and Rachel. I love what's Haley, and I love Logan and Abby. So I really love this love this world, and I would never have found out these books if it was not for that podcast, because they really said if you do not like romance, you'd like this, and I totally did. If you like TV shows like The Fosters, or a long time ago like Higher Ground, that deals with harder, more emotionally gut-wrenching issues, even like 13 Reasons Why, more so the TV show, I would say, because the book is a little bit more insular. But if you like seeing all the complexities that life has to offer and how kids deal with it, I think that Katie McGarry does a really good job. Her second series that she wrote is equally amazing. I have not read her new book, still on my list. Hopefully get to read it next month. It's on my spring TBR. But yeah, this series is one that definitely surprised me, and I will definitely be checking out more by her in the future. A library find, and that is the Clockwork Cara by Colleen Gleason. And a fun find. I have never read the original Sherlock Holmes stories, but I love detective stories, like especially like young adult detective stories, especially period detective stories with female leads. And I wound up picking this one up, and it basically follows Sherlock Holmes. I think it's Sherlock Holmes' niece. Yeah, I think this one is a niece. Another one is a sister, but this one is a niece, and Bram Stoker's sister, and they wind up teaming up together to solve crimes. And it's like some things fantastical, some things scientific, and I just really liked it. I like the strong female leads. You get both point of views, and I love the dynamics between Mia and the female lead. I just thought that it was so fun, and I read the first 3 books in the series. There's a fun callback to like present day, like there's some time traveling involved, and I really like the male lead in the story. I thought that he was so fun, and I love the interplayance of the past and our future technology and how that works, and I really, really liked it. I read the first 3 books in the series. I need to read book 4, trying to get it out for my library actually, or the audiobook. But yeah, it's a really, really fun read if you like the Brittany Cavallaro series, or if you like other like Sherlock Holmesian series, I think you'd actually like this. It was really, really fun and some kick-ass women for sure. A lot actually, but my friend Alex knew how much I hated Twilight, and I stand by my opinion. But she told me that I should really check out the Vampire Kiss series by Rochelle Mead, and I said I really don't like vampires. She's like, no, I really think you like this, and I became so invested in the series a couple years ago, and I love it. I love this series. I love the sequel series. I really love anything Rochelle Mead's that's fantasy based. I was not the biggest fan of her Glittering Court series. You'll see that later in the video in the not so good. But I really love the world building. Thought her world building for vampires was so unique and so different, and I actually like felt for the vampires, which I don't normally do, but I just was so invested in these characters, and I thought the world building, the female leads were amazing. I love Lissa and I love Rose. I just was like, oh my god, this is amazing. So it was the first book series in a while that I was like, huh, this might be a good vampire series, and I don't say that very often. And I also do like vampires as like other elements. Like I do like the Shadowhunter series. Like I like those because there's vampires in it. But this was a pure vampire world that I did not want to murder the vampires. So that's high praise for me. So if you were kind of on the whole like Twilight kick and just were burned out like I was, this might be a good series to rein you back in because it's now the whole canon is complete. I really would love her to write more in this world because I just love her world building in it. But overall, I really like Vampire Academy and highly recommend it. The good section is an Owl Crate book. I think it was 2 Mays ago. Wasn't last May. I don't think it was last year. I think it was 2 years ago. But that's Everland by Wendy Higgins. Wendy Spinella. Wendy Higgins is a different author. But this is like a Peter and Wendy and Neverland story with steampunk thrown in, and I went in like expecting to like it, but I really really liked it. I definitely need to read. I got the paperback copy of book 2 really really cheap, and I'm definitely gonna get Auslan because the covers are so pretty. But I just loved it. I just thought it was like such a way to turn the myth on its head, and I was really engaged in all the characters, and I really like need to read book 2. So I think what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna reread book 1, then read book 2, and then read Auslan because I haven't read these books in a while, so I really do need to reread them. But it was such a fun, refreshing read, and sometimes you need that. Sometimes you need to like read something out of your character, which I don't normally read a lot of what Peter and Wendy things, but I really liked it, and I definitely want to reread and continue on with the series. So that's the last book in the good section. I don't know how many are going to be in the bad section, but we will see. So the first book I'm going to talk about, as I teased earlier, is The Glittering Court by Rochelle Mead. But in a bad way, I'll be honest. And I think I had misheard or misunderstood it because at some point I was told this book had to do with fairies. So I kept waiting for like a fantasy element to capture the story and catapult it somewhere. Just never happened. And it definitely is more of a romance book, and it's definitely more of like a historical fiction book, but it's marketed as a fantasy book, and there's no fantasy elements. That's not Rochelle Mead's fault. That's the publisher's fault. So whoever work on that, because it's just not fantasy. It's historical fiction. And I think I went in really expecting some big fantasy element to catapult the story, and it just never happened. And I really had a hard time connecting to the lead in the story. Like, I didn't like her at all. Had a hard time caring about her. I thought the school was horrible, and I just was like, I don't know why I'm reading this, but I really like Rochelle Mead, so it's a struggle. I have not read the second one, even though I've heard so many good things, so one day maybe, or maybe I'm just meant to read Rochelle Mead's fantasy things. Hopefully she will write more books in that genre, but this book series was just not for me, and I just need some more incentive to read it, and I just have not heard the best things about it, but maybe one day I will continue on and give you guys my thoughts. Bit of a shock, but that is the Shatter Me series by Tahara Mott. Like an earlier video, but I love the Darkest Mind series by Alexandra Bracken, and any book series that has to do with touching of people and murdering them, and I've read a couple. I tried to read Shatter Me and I failed. That's why it's in this video, because I listened to like 20% of it about a year ago, and I just could not look past the connections to Darkest Minds. And I also read Cursed by Jennifer Armitage, which is a very, very similar premise. And again, I actually finished that book because it was for a book club I was in, but I just can't read books like that because I am such a big fan of Darkest Mind, and anything with that genre, I just tend to connect back to Darkest Mind, and I always will pick Darkest Mind just because it was probably one of the first YA book series. The first author I've ever met was Alexandra Bracken. So I like have a very, very soft spot for her in my heart. Like she was like the first author that I ever met, her and Sarah J. Maas. But yeah, so those things just like together, and I just remember reading, I'm like, I just want to go and read The Darkest Mind because I felt so much more connected to those characters. I loved Ruby a lot more than I think her name's Juliet, if I'm wrong. But yeah, so this series just did not capture me. It surprised me, but I just was not motivated to continue at all, and I was just like, you know what? Rather go read Darkest Mind. But maybe one day that will change. I know that the Restore Me just came out and people were so excited about it. But I said this before and I will say it again. I'm not the biggest paranormal romance fan, which is what this is. So maybe that's why it just did not capture me. But that's another book that surprised me, but I just was not compelled enough to continue. I'm going to chat about is This Darkest Mind by Mindy McGinnis. Lot, especially last year. It was definitely my most disappointing read of the year, and I really struggled with it. I liked Mindy McGinnis' previous book. It was called A Madness So Discreet, but I said this before, and I said it in the review too. I really struggle with unlikable characters, and this character is unlikable, and I hated her. I do not say hate very often, but I literally hated this character. I hated the plot. I could not feel any connection to her, and she made me I just was like so grossed out by her. I just was like, oh my god, this is horrible, and I could not. I finished it because it was like a review book and I felt obligated to, but boy, did I not like it. And I have heard these things about Mindy McGinnis before, that she writes very unlikable characters to make a point, and she definitely has done that. I will say that. She has definitely created a character that most people you either love this character or you hate her. There's no in between, which I love. I think that there should be so many diversity of female characters. I just struggle with them so much. I definitely want to check out her fantasy series, and I do have Female of the Species on my shelf when I met her and got it signed by her. So it's definitely on my list to hopefully read more by her in the future, but this book just did not impress me. I've talked about it so much, so I'm not going to bore you guys again, but this book just was not, it shocked me, but it was not a good surprise, unfortunately. I'm going to talk about is Until Friday Night by Abby Glock. Of the road. And I say this a little bit in this couple of other book series, but I have a very hard time with aggressive males and female relationships. Like if there's a very, very dominant male and his behavior becomes a little bit obsessive, I do have a little bit of issue with it. Definitely felt that in this book, and I really wanted to like them, but what he did and what he said in reference to her just made me feel really uncomfortable. So I did finish it, and it was okay. It wasn't my favorite. I think it was just because of the way the relationship was portrayed. But I do want to read more by her in the future. I know she has 2 other books in the series, so maybe I'll like those a little bit better. But it wasn't my favorite way to represent a relationship. And I think I just struggled with that more than anything. I thought the world was interesting. I like the characters individually, but their relationship together just came across a little bit unhealthy, and I just was not game for that. So those are all the negative books in this thing, or not so favorite books that surprised me, but I wanted to give you guys probably my favorite book, one of my favorite books I read in 2017, and that is that surprised me, and that is the Van Beekers of 141st from Book Off. And when I saw it there, I was like, oh, this has to come home with me. And I think I read it in like 2 days, and it is the perfect middle grade story. It will definitely be in my top 5 Wednesday this week because I think that's the theme. But I love this book so much. It's set in New York City around Christmas time, and it's based around these 8 kids who live in a brownstone in New York City, and their mean landlord decides to evict them the day after Christmas, and they are determined to stay where they are because they love this house, and it sends them on this adventure to try to convince their landlord to get them to stay. But it was wonderful. I laughed, I cried, I was so engaged in the story from page 1, and I just loved it. And I thought this book was so well done because the parents in this story were actually parents, and they actually had a role. Normally when you read middle grade stories, these kids are going off into the wilderness or going off on these big adventures, and the parents are just nowhere to be seen. But the parents did have a role in this story, and I think I love that more than anything. There is a book 2 coming out, which I will definitely be getting my hands on. Hopefully she comes back to book 2 under to sign, because I will definitely be getting both these books signed by her. They were lovely, and if you have not checked out this book, I highly recommend that you do. But yeah, those are all the books that surprised me recently. I hope you guys will let me know in the comments what are some books that surprised you in a good way or a bad way. And I'll be back next week with another topic from the Artsy Reader Girl. Bye, guys.